The setup. Sarah Martinez stepped off the Greyhound bus into the humid Florida night, her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The small coastal town of Millfield looked exactly like the kind of place where someone could disappear for a while. Palm trees swayed in the warm breeze, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the low hum of neon signs from the few businesses still open at this late hour. She had been traveling for 3 days straight, taking buses and trains to reach this remote corner of the state. Her long, dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore simple clothes that had seen better days. To anyone watching, she looked like just another young woman down on her luck, maybe running from something or someone. That was exactly the impression she wanted to give. Sarah walked slowly down Main Street, taking in her surroundings with what appeared to be casual interest. In reality, her trained eyes were cataloging every detail. The position of security cameras, the layout of the streets, the types of people still out at this hour. Old habits from her military training died hard, even when she was supposed to be taking a break from all of that. The Seahorse Tavern sat at the corner of Main and Harbor Streets, its weathered wooden exterior and flickering neon sign giving it the look of a place that had seen decades of sailors, fishermen, and drifters pass through its doors. Through the grimy windows, Sarah could see it was busy despite the late hour. Perfect. She pushed through the heavy door and was immediately hit with the smell of stale beer, fried food, and cigarette smoke that seemed to have soaked into the very walls of the place. The interior was dimly lit, with mismatched tables and chairs scattered around a central bar that had probably been there since the 1970s. Country music played from an old jukebox in the corner, and a few locals were scattered around, nursing their drinks and keeping to themselves. Sarah made her way to the bar and ordered a beer from the bartender, a heavy-set man with graying hair and suspicious eyes. She paid with cash and found a small table near the window where she could watch the street while appearing to mind her own business. She pulled out a worn paperback book and pretended to read while actually observing the other patrons. It didn't take long for her to spot them. 5 men sitting at a large round table in the back corner, talking in low voices and occasionally glancing in her direction. They looked like the kind of men who made their living through means that probably weren't entirely legal. The apparent leader was a tall, thin man with greasy black hair and a scar running down his left cheek. The others were a mix of types, but they all had that same predatory look in their eyes. Sarah had encountered men like these before in various places around the world. They were opportunists who preyed on the vulnerable, and they had clearly marked her as potential prey. She took another sip of her beer and turned a page in her book, all while keeping track of their movements in her peripheral vision. The scarred man whispered something to his companions, and one of them, a stocky man with a beard, got up and walked to the bar. He ordered another round of drinks but took his time, clearly trying to get a better look at Sarah. She could feel his eyes on her but continued to act oblivious, occasionally tucking a strand of hair behind her ear or shifting in her seat as if she were uncomfortable being alone in such a rough place. When the bearded man returned to his table, the group's discussion became more animated. Sarah couldn't hear their exact words over the music and general bar noise, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. They were planning something, and she was the target. She finished her beer and gathered her things, making sure to appear slightly nervous as she did so. As she stood to leave, she accidentally knocked her book off the table, letting out a small gasp of frustration. The scarred man immediately stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Miss, you dropped this," he said, walking over with the book in his hand. Up close, Sarah could see that his scar was old but deep, probably from a knife fight. His smile revealed several missing teeth, and his breath reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. "Oh, thank you so much," Sarah said, her voice soft and grateful. She reached for the book with slightly trembling hands, playing up the act of a nervous young woman alone in a strange town. "I'm sorry. I'm just really tired from traveling all day." No problem at all, the man replied, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made her skin crawl. You're not from around here, are you? I'm Jake, by the way. He extended his hand, and Sarah hesitated for just a moment before shaking it. I'm Sarah, and no, I'm just passing through. Looking for work, actually. She let her voice carry a note of desperation, as if she were at the end of her rope financially. Jake's smile widened. Well, Sarah, you're in luck. My friends and I might be able to help you out. We run a little business operation around here, and we're always looking for new talent. The way he said talent made it clear that he wasn't talking about legitimate employment. Sarah glanced over at his table, where the other 4 men were watching the interaction with predatory interest. She let a flicker of uncertainty cross her face, as if she were debating whether to trust these strangers. That's very kind of you, she said finally. But I think I should probably get going. I need to find a place to stay for the night. Nonsense, Jake said, placing a hand on her arm. His grip was firm enough to make his intent clear without being overtly threatening. The night's still young, and like I said, we might be able to help each other out. Why don't you come sit with us for a few minutes? We can discuss some opportunities that might interest you. Sarah looked around the bar, noting that the few other patrons were either too drunk to pay attention or deliberately avoiding eye contact. The bartender was busy washing glasses and pretending not to notice what was happening. She was truly on her own, exactly as she had planned. I suppose I could stay for a little while, she said, allowing herself to be guided toward the table where the other men waited. But I really can't stay long. I have to catch an early bus tomorrow. Of course, Jake said smoothly. We completely understand. We're just friendly folks who like to help out travelers when we can. As they approached the table, the other men stood up with exaggerated politeness. Jake made quick introductions. There was Tommy, the bearded man who had been watching her earlier, Rico, a nervous-looking guy with shifty eyes, Big Mike, who lived up to his nickname with his massive frame and intimidating presence, and finally Carlos, a younger man with slicked-back hair and gold teeth who kept staring at her with unconcealed hunger. Gentlemen, Jake announced, this is Sarah. She's new in town and looking for work. I told her we might be able to point her in the right direction. The men exchanged glances that Sarah pretended not to notice. She sat down in the chair they offered her, placing her duffel bag on the floor beside her feet. To them, she probably looked like she was trying to protect her few worldly possessions. In reality, she was ensuring quick access to the bag's contents if she needed them. So, Sarah, Tommy said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a charming smile. What kind of work are you looking for? We know people in all sorts of businesses around here. Anything, really, Sarah replied, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold or nervous. I've been traveling for weeks and my money's almost gone. I just need something to get back on my feet. The men exchanged another series of meaningful looks. Sarah could practically see the wheels turning in their heads as they calculated how to best exploit what they perceived as her desperate situation. Well, Jake said, signaling the bartender for another round, we might have just the thing, but it's the kind of opportunity that requires a certain level of trust and commitment. Are you the kind of person who can keep her mouth shut and follow directions? The question hung in the air like a threat. Sarah let her eyes widen slightly, as if she were beginning to understand that this might not be the legitimate job opportunity she had hoped for. I'm not sure I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't worry about it right now, Carlos interjected, his gold teeth glinting in the dim light. Let's just get to know each other better first. Tell us about yourself, Sarah. Where are you coming from? What brings you to our little town? Sarah launched into a carefully crafted story about losing her job, getting evicted from her apartment, and having nowhere else to turn. She made herself sound increasingly vulnerable and isolated, painting a picture of a young woman with no family, no friends, and no one who would miss her if she disappeared. The men listened with growing interest, occasionally asking questions that seemed designed to confirm her isolation rather than show genuine concern for her welfare. They bought her drinks, which she nursed carefully while appearing to become more relaxed and talkative as the evening wore on. As the night progressed, the bar began to empty out. The bartender called last call, and the few remaining patrons settled their tabs and headed home. Soon, Sarah found herself alone with the 5 men in the increasingly empty tavern. "You know, Sarah," Jake said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "we've been thinking about your situation, and we might have a proposition for you. But it's not the kind of thing we can discuss here. Why don't you come with us to our place? We can talk more privately there, and you'll have a safe place to spend the night." The offer was clearly not optional. The other men had positioned themselves strategically around the table, blocking her access to the front door. Big Mike had moved to stand near the back exit, his massive frame making it clear that route was not available either. Sarah looked around the nearly empty bar with wide, frightened eyes. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe I should just find a motel somewhere." "Now, Sarah," Tommy said, his earlier friendliness replaced by a harder edge. "We've been nothing but nice to you all evening. We're offering you a warm bed and a chance to make some real money. Don't you think you owe us at least a few minutes of your time to hear our proposal?" The threat in his words was barely concealed. Sarah could see that they had moved past the pretense of this being a voluntary arrangement. She was supposed to be trapped, helpless, and completely at their mercy. She stood up slowly, reaching down to pick up her duffel bag. "Okay," she said quietly, "but I really do need to catch that bus tomorrow morning." "Don't worry about the bus," Jake said with a cold smile. "Something tells me you're going to want to stick around our town for a while. We're going to take very good care of you, Sarah. Very good care indeed." As they escorted her toward the back exit, Sarah caught the bartender's eye one last time. He quickly looked away, making it clear that he had no intention of getting involved in whatever was about to happen. She was truly on her own now, exactly as she had planned from the moment she stepped off that bus. The 5 men had no idea what they had just walked into. They saw a vulnerable young woman with nowhere to run and no one to help her. What they had actually found was something far more dangerous than their worst nightmares could have prepared them for. But they would learn that soon enough. The trap. The warehouse sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings that had once housed a thriving fishing industry. Jake's pickup truck crunched over gravel and broken glass as he pulled up to the loading dock. The other men had followed in a separate vehicle, effectively boxing Sarah in with no chance of escape during the short drive from the tavern. "Here we are," Jake announced cheerfully, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. "Home sweet home. This is where we conduct most of our business operations." Sarah climbed out of the truck, clutching her duffel bag and looking around nervously at the desolate surroundings. The nearest building with lights was at least half a mile away, and the sound of the ocean was much louder here, effectively masking any noise that might come from inside the warehouse. "It's pretty isolated out here," she observed, her voice carrying just the right note of growing concern. "That's the point," Carlos said with a laugh that held no humor. "Privacy is very important in our line of work. Can't have neighbors complaining about the noise, you know?" The warehouse door rolled up with a rusty screech, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with stacks of crates, old fishing equipment, and what appeared to be a makeshift living area in one corner. A few bare bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The air inside was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify but didn't like. "Welcome to our little headquarters," Jake said, gesturing for her to follow him inside. "This is where we plan our operations, store our merchandise, and sometimes entertain special guests." Sarah noticed that Big Mike had positioned himself by the door they had just entered through, while Rico moved to block the only other exit she could see. Tommy and Carlos spread out to either side, effectively surrounding her in the center of the warehouse. Their earlier pretense of friendliness had evaporated completely now that they were away from any potential witnesses. "So," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "what exactly is this business opportunity you wanted to discuss?" Jake walked over to a folding table where several bottles of liquor and some glasses were set up. He poured himself a drink and took a long sip before answering. "Well, Sarah, here's the thing. We've been watching you all evening, and we think you have exactly the qualities we're looking for in our next venture." "What kind of qualities?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew where this conversation was heading. "You're young, attractive, and most importantly, you're alone in the world with nowhere to go and no one who's going to come looking for you," Tommy said bluntly. "Those are very valuable assets in our particular business." Sarah felt her blood run cold, though she was careful not to let her reaction show. "I don't understand. What kind of business are you talking about?" Carlos laughed and pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photographs. "Let me show you some of our previous success stories," he said, moving closer to her. "These are some of the other girls who've had the opportunity to work with us. They're all making very good money now, though they're working in locations that are a bit more exotic than Millfield." Sarah glanced at the phone screen and saw exactly what she had expected to see. Young women all looking frightened and drugged, in various states of undress in what appeared to be cheap hotel rooms or shipping containers. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to maintain the facade of confusion and growing fear. "I don't want to see this," she said, backing away from Carlos. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I should go." "Go where?" Rico spoke up for the first time, his voice high and nervous but filled with malicious excitement. "You said yourself you don't have anywhere to go, no money, no family. Face it, sweetheart, you need us more than we need you." Big Mike stepped away from the door, removing any doubt that this was a voluntary situation. At nearly 6.5 feet tall and weighing at least 300 pounds, he looked like he could snap Sarah in half without breaking a sweat. "Boss is right," he rumbled in a voice like grinding gravel. "You're going to work for us one way or another. The only question is whether you make this easy or hard on yourself." Jake set down his drink and walked over to a large crate, pulling out several items that made Sarah's skin crawl. Zip ties, duct tape, a syringe filled with some kind of clear liquid, and a small digital camera. "Here's how this works, Sarah. We're going to take some pictures of you to advertise your services to our clients overseas. Then you're going to take a little nap while we arrange transportation to your new place of employment. And if you're thinking about screaming or fighting," Carlos added, pulling a knife from his pocket, "remember that we're in the middle of nowhere. No one can hear you, and no one's coming to help you. Your best bet is to cooperate, and maybe we'll be gentle with you." Sarah looked around the warehouse, taking in every detail with the trained eye of someone who had been in similar situations before, though never as the intended victim. The men were confident, almost cocky in their assumption that they held all the power. They had done this before, probably many times, and they believed they knew exactly how this scenario would play out. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I'll do whatever you want. But please don't hurt me. I've never done anything like this before." "Don't worry," Jake said with a cruel smile. "By the time we're done with you, you'll be a real professional. Our clients pay top dollar for fresh merchandise, and you're going to make us all very rich." Tommy moved to a corner of the warehouse and dragged over a mattress that had clearly seen better days. "This is where we conduct our photo shoots," he explained. "Strip down to your underwear and we'll get started. The faster we get through this, the sooner you can get some rest." Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the hem of her shirt, but not from fear. After 18 months of intensive training at Naval Special Warfare Command and 6 years of active duty operations around the world, she was finally about to put her skills to use in a way that would actually make a difference. These men had clearly been operating their human trafficking operation for months, if not years, ruining countless lives and destroying families. "I can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Rico said impatiently. "Stop wasting our time and do what you're told." Carlos moved closer with his knife, using the flat of the blade to lift her chin. "Listen carefully, little girl. You can take off your clothes yourself, or we can cut them off. Either way, those clothes are coming off. But if we have to cut them off, we might accidentally cut more than just fabric." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of victimizing helpless people. These men didn't just see her as a source of income, they enjoyed the power they held over their victims. They fed on fear and desperation, and they had no doubt that she would provide them with plenty of both. "Okay," she said finally, reaching again for her shirt. Just please don't hurt me." "That's a good girl," Jake said approvingly. "You're learning already. The clients like it when the girls are obedient and eager to please." As Sarah slowly pulled her shirt over her head, she made sure to keep her movements awkward and hesitant, as if she were struggling with the reality of what was happening to her. In truth, she was using the time to make final calculations about the positions of all 5 men, the layout of the warehouse, and the various weapons and tools available to her. Big Mike had moved closer to get a better view, while Rico had pulled out a tablet to begin taking pictures. Tommy was setting up a tripod with a more professional camera, and Carlos was still standing close with his knife, enjoying the sense of power he held over her. Jake, meanwhile, had picked up the syringe and was checking to make sure it was properly filled. "This will help you relax," he explained. "Some of the girls get a little too worked up during their first photo shoot, so we like to give them something to calm their nerves." Sarah knew that whatever was in that syringe wasn't meant to calm her nerves, but to make her compliant and unable to resist whatever they had planned for her. She had seen the effects of such drugs during her military service, both in training scenarios and in real-world operations, to break up similar trafficking rings overseas. "I'm scared," she admitted, and for the first time, there was a note of genuine emotion in her voice. Not fear for herself, but anger at what these men had done to countless other young women who hadn't been trained to fight back. "Fear is good," Tommy said, adjusting his camera settings. "Fear makes for better pictures. The clients like to see that spark of terror in their eyes. It adds to the excitement." Rico giggled nervously. "Some of them cry during the photo shoots. The crying ones always bring top dollar." Sarah felt her jaw clench involuntarily. She forced herself to relax and maintain her cover, but inside, her anger was building to a dangerous level. She had spent 6 years of her life hunting down men like these in countries around the world. Now she had found them in her own backyard, and they had made the mistake of thinking she was just another victim. "Please," she said one more time, looking directly at Jake. "I'll do anything else. I'll help you with whatever other work you need done. But please don't make me do this." Jake's response was to grab her arm roughly and press the needle of the syringe against her skin. "Sorry, sweetheart, but you don't get to negotiate the terms of your employment. This is happening whether you like it or not." That's when Sarah made her decision. She had seen enough, heard enough, and learned enough about their operation to know exactly what kind of monsters she was dealing with. The time for playing the victim was over. Now it was time to show these 5 predators what happened when they picked on someone who was anything but helpless. But first, she needed them to get just a little bit closer, to position themselves exactly where she wanted them. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would finally catch up with Jake, Tommy, Rico, Big Mike, and Carlos, or whether they would simply find another victim to replace the one who had just walked into their trap. What they didn't realize was that the trap had been set for them from the moment Sarah Martinez stepped off that bus, and now it was about to snap shut around them with lethal precision. Or the revelation. The moment Jake pressed the syringe against her arm, Sarah moved. 6 years of intensive combat training took over as she grabbed his wrist with lightning speed, twisting it with enough force to snap the bones. The syringe flew across the warehouse as Jake screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his mangled hand. Before the other men could react to what had just happened, Sarah had already spun around and driven her elbow into Carlos's throat with surgical precision. The blow crushed his windpipe, and he collapsed, gasping for air that would never come. His knife clattered harmlessly across the concrete floor. "What the hell?" Tommy shouted, stumbling backward and reaching for something in his jacket. Sarah didn't give him the chance to find it. She launched herself across the space between them, her fist connecting with his solar plexus and driving every bit of air from his lungs. As he doubled over in agony, her knee came up to meet his face, breaking his nose and sending him crashing into his camera equipment. Rico was fumbling with his tablet, either trying to call for help or record what was happening. Sarah grabbed a wrench from a nearby workbench and threw it with the accuracy of someone who had been trained to hit targets at much greater distances. The heavy tool struck Rico in the temple, and he went down like a sack of concrete, blood pooling beneath his head. That left Big Mike, who had finally overcome his shock and was charging toward her like an angry bull. At over 300 pounds, he had enough mass to seriously hurt her if he managed to get his hands on her. But mass meant nothing without speed and technique. Sarah waited until he was almost on top of her, then dropped low and swept his legs out from under him. His own momentum sent him crashing into a stack of crates, which toppled over and buried him beneath their weight. She could hear him groaning underneath the debris, but he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. 5 men who had thought they were hunting easy prey now lay broken and beaten around the warehouse floor. Only Jake was still conscious, whimpering and cradling his destroyed wrist. Sarah walked over to her duffel bag and unzipped it, revealing its true contents for the first time. Instead of the belongings of a desperate young woman, the bag contained military-grade equipment that told a very different story about who she really was. Body armor, night vision goggles, zip ties, a tactical knife, and a satellite phone were neatly arranged alongside her service weapon and enough ammunition to handle a much larger group of threats. She pulled out the zip ties and methodically secured each of the men, even the unconscious ones. Professional training had taught her never to assume an enemy was truly neutralized until they were properly restrained. As she worked, she spoke to Jake, who was staring at her with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs," she said calmly, as if she were introducing herself at a dinner party. "I've spent the last 6 years hunting down human trafficking operations in places like Afghanistan, Somalia, and the Philippines. When I heard through certain channels that there was a similar operation running right here in the United States, I decided to take some personal time to investigate." Jake's eyes went wide as the full scope of his mistake began to dawn on him. "You're military?" he whispered. "Not just military," Sarah corrected, pulling out her satellite phone. "I'm part of a very specialized unit that deals with exactly the kind of scum you and your friends represent." "Did you really think that a trained Navy SEAL would have trouble handling 5 small-town criminals who prey on defenseless women?" She speed-dialed a number that connected her directly to a joint task force that specialized in domestic human trafficking cases. "This is Lieutenant Martinez. I have 5 subjects in custody and evidence of an active trafficking operation. I'm going to need a full tactical team for site processing and victim recovery. GPS coordinates are being transmitted now." While she waited for the response, she walked around the warehouse, documenting everything she saw with a small digital camera from her bag. The photos Carlos had shown her, the restraints Jake had prepared, the drug-filled syringe, and various other pieces of evidence that would ensure these men never saw freedom again. "Please," Jake begged, "we can make a deal. We have money, lots of money, and information about other operations. We can help you catch bigger fish than us." Sarah looked down at him with cold, professional detachment. "You're right about one thing. You do have information that will be useful. But you're wrong about everything else. There is no deal. There is no money that can buy your way out of this. And there are no bigger fish than the men who actually put their hands on the victims." She pulled out a small recording device and set it on the table next to the liquor bottles. "This conversation is being recorded for use in federal court proceedings. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right until your attorney arrives. Anything you say will be used against you in a court of law." Tommy had regained consciousness and was staring at her through swollen, blackened eyes. "You can't do this," he mumbled through his broken nose. "You're not a cop. You don't have jurisdiction here." "Actually," Sarah replied, "under the Military Cooperation with Law Enforcement Officials Act and several other federal statutes, I have full authority to detain suspects involved in human trafficking operations that cross state or international borders. Your operation clearly qualifies on both counts." She walked over to the computer equipment she had spotted earlier and began photographing the screens and hard drives. "Besides, local law enforcement has been notified and they're already en route. Agent Rebecca Foster from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force will be here within the hour to take formal custody. I'm just keeping you warm until she arrives." Rico had also awakened, though he seemed to be having trouble focusing his eyes. "This isn't real," he said weakly. "This can't be happening." "Oh, it's very real," Sarah assured him, "and it's been a long time coming. Do you have any idea how many young women you've destroyed, how many families you've torn apart, how many lives you've ruined with your sick business?" She pulled out a thick folder from her duffel bag and opened it to reveal dozens of photographs and missing person reports. "I've been tracking your operation for 3 months. Melissa Santos, age 19, disappeared from a bus station in Jacksonville. Jennifer Walsh, 22, last seen leaving a diner in Tallahassee. Amanda Rodriguez, 18, vanished from a truck stop in Gainesville." Sarah held up each photograph as she spoke, making sure all of the conscious men could see the faces of their victims. "These are just a few of the girls whose lives you've stolen, and these are just the ones we know about. How many others are there? How many more families are still waiting for daughters who will never come home?" Jake had stopped whimpering about his broken wrist and was staring at the photographs with growing horror. "We never killed anyone," he said desperately. "We just moved them along to people who could give them work. It's not like we hurt them." "You sold them," Sarah said flatly. "You drugged them, photographed them, and sold them to buyers overseas who did things to them that I won't even describe in polite company. And you did it for money, over and over again, without any thought for the human cost of your actions." The sound of helicopters approaching could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the minute. Sarah checked her watch and nodded with satisfaction. "Right on time. The cavalry is arriving, gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed these last few minutes of freedom, because they're going to be your last for a very long time." Big Mike had finally managed to push enough crates off himself to sit up, though he was clearly in significant pain. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do this? Why did you come after us?" Sarah looked at him with something that might have been pity if he hadn't been a monster who destroyed lives for profit. "Because someone has to," she said simply. "Because there are predators in this world who think they can hurt innocent people without consequences. And because I took an oath to protect those who can't protect themselves." The helicopters were directly overhead now, and spotlights were beginning to illuminate the area around the warehouse. Soon, the place would be crawling with federal agents, local police, forensic specialists, and victim recovery experts. These 5 men would disappear into the federal justice system and likely never see daylight again. "The girls you trafficked," Sarah continued, "they were someone's daughters, someone's sisters, someone's friends. They had hopes and dreams and futures that you stole from them. Tonight, justice finally catches up with you." As armed tactical officers began surrounding the building, Sarah holstered her weapon and prepared to hand over custody of her prisoners. Her mission was complete, but she knew this was just one small victory in a much larger war against the kind of evil that these men represented. Jake looked up at her one last time, his face pale with shock and pain. "You could have been killed," he said. "We could have hurt you before you had a chance to fight back." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the warehouse, but it was not a warm expression. "No," she said quietly, "you really couldn't have. You see, gentlemen, you made a critical error in judgment tonight. You thought you were hunting a helpless victim. What you actually found was a predator who hunts predators, and now you know exactly what it feels like to be the prey." The warehouse door rolled up one final time as federal agents stormed in, weapons drawn and ready for anything. But their work was already done for them. 5 of the most dangerous criminals in the region lay zip-tied and defeated, their human trafficking operation exposed, and their victims one step closer to being rescued. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had accomplished her mission with precision and professionalism. 5 men had thought they had found an easy target. Instead, they had discovered what happened when evil tried to prey upon a United States Navy SEAL. Justice had been served, and it had been served with lethal efficiency.